Good afternoon, muy buenas tardes. I'm Jerry Carlson. I'm a senior fellow at the Bildner Center for Western Hemispheric Studies, also professor here at CUNY. And on the behalf of the Bildner Center for Western Hemispheric Studies, I'd like to welcome all of you here for the second of our summer film screenings. I want to take just 3 to 5 minutes to give a little bit of context for this film. We'll then roll the film. It's a full 2-hour film, but I think you're going to be captivated virtually every second by this remarkable piece of filmmaking. I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about the context of the film and several of the contexts of Colombian filmmaking, of the way the Amazon has been treated in cinema, and also who this director is. I'll begin actually with the simplest of those things, that is, who is the director? It's Ciro Guerra, and he's part of really a remarkable young generation of Colombian filmmakers. This is his third feature film. His first was set in Bogota, and it's a kind of street drama called Wandering Shadows, about the people you would meet on the street and the long backstories that would bring them to Colombia. His second feature film, called The Wind Journeys, is available very easily here on streaming, say Amazon Video. You can find it. It's well distributed here. And for those of you who are admirers of the Colombian musical form vallenato, it is the story of an enchanted accordion. And takes place within the Caribbean coastal region of Colombia, and would be part, you could say, it's another journey to Macondo, the Garcia Marquez mythical world, although it's not a direct adaptation, it comes from the same culture. And he's, as you can see from the first 2 films, he seems to be making a tour of the very distinct regional cultures that constitute Colombia, because as we know, it's a large, middle-sized country with extraordinary geographical as well as cultural diversity within it. A little bit about Colombian cinema. It has not, I mean this with the greatest respect for a country I spend a great deal of my time in. It has not been considered one of the major cinemas of Latin America. That, of course, has gone to Mexico and Argentina because of the duration and the wealth of their production. Clearly, there have been distinct and very fine films from virtually all of the countries at one time or another. However, in the recent 15 years or so, Colombia has been emerging with, as I said, a really remarkable generation of filmmakers, all under 50 at this point. They have won prizes in the major international festivals and have, for the first time in the history of Colombian cinema, achieved international distribution of a number of the films. There are, of course, earlier pioneers. Particularly, I will draw your attention to something like Rodrigo D. No Future, which is a major film set in Medellin, in what we have to say were the bad old days of Medellin. A really quite remarkable film that was perhaps the first true breakthrough about 25 years ago as it hit the international festival circuit. But today's film, as I think you're here because you know it's set in the Amazon, and I think it's well for us just to think a little bit about how really few, which is not to say we don't have some very good, but how few films we have that are serious treatments of the encounters between indigenous peoples of the tropical zones of the Americas, and whether it be explorers, conquistadores, or just downright exploiters of one kind or another. And certainly this is a film considered by many critics as a major chapter in this very small and distinguished group of films, some of which I know many of you have seen, such as Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Hector Babenco's At Play in the Fields of the Lord, or the delightfully ironic How Tasty Was My Little Frenchman, by Nelson Peral dos Santos that makes the cannibal indigenous the heroes of the piece. And I point in that direction because one of the major questions about any of these films that portray the contact between peoples of the, what I'll call the tropical zones of the Americas and European descended peoples, is who gets to tell the story. And of course, much of what we have is the story as told by the conquerors, who may have had evil motives, may have had motives they thought that were good that we may think are evil now, or may have had mixed motives. But it's not so much that we get the voice or the point of view that comes from, that at least attempts to come from inside the indigenous cultures. Well, this is changing a bit in the cinemas of the Americas in the last 10 or 15 years in very, very positive ways. I would, for example, recommend to you another recent film called Ixcanul, which takes place in the Mayan dialect-speaking villages of Guatemala, and is performed in the Mayan dialect and assumes the worldview of those people. We get something, as you're going to see, something here with this trade-off of point of views in this film. Afterwards, I'll be happy to take any of your questions or to hear some of your commentaries. It's one of the traditions of this film series that we do have a Q&A afterwards. So, as you may imagine, this is a film that has been extraordinarily well received critically. Because, first of all, it's a film of extraordinary beauty. But in addition to that, it simply shows us many things and draws from historical materials that certainly haven't been brought to the screen in this kind of way, before. The first thing I would simply say is for all of us to think back and when was the last time that you saw, you know, a motion picture, or in fact experienced a narrative in which the authoritative, knowledgeable voice in most ways is given to the central indigenous character. And that his particular manner of knowing the world, which is certainly not a Eurocentric manner of knowing the world, is actually not merely given respect, but is seen as a central feature of the film and of what the, you know, in one sense, presumed protagonists, which would be the European explorers, are actually not the protagonists, but it is, and the film privileges, obviously, I can never pronounce his name correctly as much as I try. The shaman, because he's the first person who is given the camera, and of course throughout the film, not only does the camera respect him deeply, but the camera follows him. That is, we have very much he is a guide for us, and the camera is deeply allied with him. Also, just a few comments. It's a film performed in the actual mixture of languages that you would encounter in such a situation, including the Messiah being this lost Brazilian who somehow has wandered into this encampment and installed himself in Cart of Darkness, Kurtz-like fashion as the Messiah. Of course, the film also, you know, takes seriously all of the madness caused in numerous ways by the contact of these peoples with the world. Not only their genocide, whether intentional through the actions of the robber barons, or unintentional on the part of the scientists who believe that they are acting out of goodwill in all instances. So I think that's a good, you know, setup for any questions or comments you may wish to make. We do have speakers on either side here, and we're trying, so everybody will be able to hear something. If you have something you'd like to say about the film, or a question you would like to ask about the film. It has won, as I said, any number of awards, or I might also say, you probably got from the upfront on the fact this is a film that was in development for a number of years, because this is not something you just go to a Hollywood studio and say, I've got this great idea about an indigenous shaman. You guys want to put up a couple of $1 million? Doesn't work that way. So this is a film that has been brought along by many ways in which it was developed through a number of funds that are European and Latin American funds for the development of this kind of project. So there are many people who came together to develop it, and then obviously who came together for its creation itself. Okay. It's a bit of an overwhelming film as well. I mean, you're just kind of taken into another world. Yeah, please.
As a photographer, I was interested in the fact it's shot in black and white, gorgeously, you know, grayscale. Wondering if, my guess is it was shot in HD video then, and so obviously the choice for black and white was not a financial one, because you can just filter out the color. But then, of course, the color comes back at the very end. So, I mean, besides the fact that it was beautifully filmed, what do you think were the filmmakers' ideas behind making it a monochromatic? Great
question. I think there's multiple motives. I mean, one is that we associate the ethnographic record with black and white, and certainly of this period. I mean, it changes to color afterwards. So there is that association of the fact that this is based upon ethnographic journals that have been taken. So I think there's that association, but also there's the way in which we don't live any longer in a world in which our media are black and white. And so I think there is this removal from our reality and a placing of us in another reality. Also, I think this is and I'd be interested in your thoughts as a photographer about this, that this is not, of course this is realist photography. There's no CGI here. There's no special, effects, except perhaps at the end when the color comes in with the designs. We'll come back to that in a second. But there's a way in which you could say the black and white has this hyper-realist effect, that there is this, deeply lyrical but also hallucinatory effect of the entire film. And I think that's one of the things they were very much going for with the cinematography. In recent years, when I teach courses having to do with the encounters of the West with the global South, I've assigned to my students a wonderful Portuguese sociologist and cultural theorist, a man named Boaventura de Jesus Santos, and he's completely fluent in English, and so he actually coins words. He writes both in Portuguese and English. And one of his coinages is epistemicide, and which he views as a danger in the world. And what he means by that is something even grander than the fact that we lose a number of languages every year in the world because the last speakers of those languages die. But he means something much grander than that we lose entire systems of knowledge, because a number of systems of knowledge that have had very large power in the world have a certain arrogance about their way of knowing the world. Some of those systems are economic, some of those systems are religious, some of those systems are overtly political, but they all share a kind of epistemological arrogance that they can map all of the world. And he says one of our great dangers is that we keep killing systems of knowledge because we don't respect them. And this is part of the collateral damage of the world system as we have it. And so I think that's, not only do we have a shaman who's our protagonist, but I think that the artistic, talent that's brought to the rendering of his way of seeing the world through this cinematography is, in a certain sense, a cinematic attempt to create this system of knowing the world, not just through the potions themselves, and through the dialogue that coaches us about this. I mean, about how you should respect the world. I mean, we could take any number of scenes, but I think the manner of seeing the world created by the cinematography is part of the way in which the film wants to give us that kind of gift of the way of knowledge of the shaman himself. So I think it's a terrific question. So, and that's just aside from the fact that it's just knockout beautiful and fascinating to watch second by second, But I think it's more than just beautiful. It's not, that. It's hooked up with the entire vision of the film.
Yeah, I've been deeply moved by this movie because I came to the United States in 1978, but I left in 2009 just by accident to live in Peru. I'm from Peru. Oh. And I had experienced these sacred plants, and it had changed my life forever. But I have a doubt about the chacruna. I don't know if you know anything about it, because in Peru, I learned that the chacruna, and it's spelled, I guess, with a CH, is kind of like the magic different plants that each shaman had kind of like their own formula to make these plants, or to make the plants active, if you want to call it that way. And I wondered if there is such a plant as the chacruna, or just like I learned that it's just different plants that each shaman has.
Here's what I think. I'm coming from two sources to give you the answer. One source is, while this is based upon these travel journals themselves, there's a way in which whenever you're adapting something like this, you have to take some dramatic license. And the dramatic license is usually to simplify in some way. Now, this is a film that on the one hand is reaching out to give us a more complex version of the world. But to do so, it has to simplify certain anthropological or cultural issues, so it gives us a story we can follow in certain kinds of ways. So I think they've reduced that. And also, I have, by coincidence today, one of my best friends is an anthropologist, and he happens to be an ethnobotanist as well, who's worked with shamans in Peru. And what he would say, he would be on your side, is that there's so many microcultures that you're dealing with. Now, that's brought up in the film itself when they're talking about who is a people from this place or that place, and each of them has different traditions, each of which is complex, and each of which, once those people are reduced, that not only worldviews, but that knowledge of the relationship between nature, herbs, and curative powers or visionary powers or whatever is lost. So I think they use the notion of the one plant through the shaman, but it's because it's his version of knowledge of his. But playing devil's advocate for a second, you could do Embrace of the Serpent 2. And follow a different shaman, from a different area, from a different group of people, and it would perhaps be different and reflect different belief systems. Right? But thank you for bringing that forward, sir.
As I was watching the film, I was sort of getting into the sort of how the shaman sort of viewed sort of our world as being sort of insane, the amount of things and stuff that we brought in. And I don't want to cheapen the film, but it's sort of, in a way, it reminded me of a film that I saw, has to be many, many years ago, perhaps when it first came out, Koyana Squatsi.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of the
World Out of Balance.
World Out of Balance, and sort of a reflection of how we live. And how that must be viewed as being so disconnected from what we are supposed to be a part of, and how we sort of distance ourselves from sort of everything, and the person saying, I don't want to die also, as death being sort of basically a natural part of life, but it's in the film, the explorer is sort of like removed from that as well. It's sort of like a contagion that can't be recognized.
Well, I'm in agreement with you, and I'll come back to the whole notion of if you choose a protagonist like this and you imbue him with agency. First of all, he really is a protagonist. He can do things. He can act in the world, and he's self-confident about that. And you also give him, this knowledge and self-confidence. Then you have somebody who not only through his actions can show us a different world, but he does it, through language as well. I mean, he laughs at. With confidence, he laughs at part of the worldview as well as lecturing against it. So it's his full view. I mean, there's a moment in which he just, he falls back laughing, at the traditions, because he does not share of the same sentimental views. Okay, well, we may share those views with the Europeans, but he has the confidence to do that and just say this is ridiculous. Okay, and whether we agree or disagree, it certainly shakes us up to the degree that we're put in a position, because he's not a ridiculous character, we're put in a position of self-examination by the film, and I think that's one of the film's major virtues. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was wondering what the thinking is about the general historical accuracy of the film, and also specifically about the scene with the children in the jungle at the center.
I can tell you two things. Given the kind of normal forgiveness we have over dramatic license, this film has not been criticized for historical inaccuracy. In fact, it's been praised for the degree to which it's drawn from the travel chronicles and from other sources. It's a deeply researched film, which brings in, many different threads of the contact between Amazonian peoples and the external world. So it's very interesting that the film chooses to, and this is also point of his point of view, it chooses to show effects, but not to and we are made to know causes, but it doesn't choose to show us those villains as protagonists. Therefore, do we ever see a robber baron? No. And we only see one priest, okay? But what we see throughout the film is the effect of the rubber boom and its destruction. Okay, we never even see the Colombian troops who are clearly coming and massacring. So we see the institution of the church and its impact. We see the economic impact of the rubber boom, and we see the related political impact of the rivalry of the countries for the control of this economic boom economy, but without going out there and making sure that you have an antagonist that's individualized. Oh, there's the only one who comes close to that is the priest, who's clearly loco because of his isolation. I mean, he has reconcentrated all of his theology into this utterly rigid manner. But he's the only one who is in that way, and we have the Messiah. But again, he's clearly, unhinged by the whole thing. But it suggests these larger systems, and that these people we see, it's not that they're villains per se, they act in a villainous manner, but they're only acting out functions of these larger forces that are coming in and destroying these people. Okay? Yes, sir, please.
Good evening. I have several things. I was a little bit late, but as a native person
Right.
from Ecuador, it is interesting how still the society, the professors, the film industry, even that they have a good intentions, but for example, is a critique.
Right,
And
sure.
I hope you will not get mad or people.
That's why we're here. We're
I'm
here
not
for
an
a discussion.
anthropologist. I'm not a shaman.
Right.
But the first thing is, there's no such a thing shaman in our world. The shaman is a term that it was from
It's an
Siberia.
invention by anthropology, correct?
And that's completely wrong because it doesn't describe to the person who does the medicine. This is one first thing. And I think it needs to be in the society, in the classrooms, needs to be changed. Right. That's one. Two, yakuruna, that's a Quechua term. And yaku means water, and runa means people. Right. But I believe in the film, I'm not sure, as I said, I maybe described or said at the beginning, but it means yakuruna is the name, is the describing the medicine person. Because it says only yakuruna can save you, right? And so that's the name. It's not a shaman, it's a yakuruna. And somebody was asking, like, it's that a plant or medicine? No, yakuruna is the person's name, the medicine person's name. And so yakuruna also is a term because in the native society it has to be women and men, parity. Not like in this civilized society, it is only men. Now, so we need to, as I said, I'm not a professor, but as you need to research and present to the public. Because this movie, perhaps the third critique is that always is somebody coming to our land. Always is the savior. Oh. So we are not capable of doing things. I know that they are taking the man to, to change, to teach, to respect. It's like here in this North America, that sometimes the native people take the child's and teaching so they can go back and help. But it's still, as I said, it is a lot of things. And perhaps another example is that somebody says, showing the gun and says, are you Colombian? And the man says, doesn't answer. So that means like, who are you? This is my land. This is my territory, this then. So the last thing is not to take you so much time and not to make you tired, is that I would like to know is if this movie is aimed to define the knowledge, the wisdom of the indigenous peoples is considered as a philosophy or simply as a cosmovision. Because there has been a lot of books, and I don't read so much, but I have heard that it says, Native people, they don't know. It's only cosmovision, little thing. And in the Europe, the Greeks and et cetera, they have a philosophy you don't have. But in our world, I just wanted to mention that this is like thousands of years of old knowledge that is still there. And so I hope, as I said, in the classroom, you see the wording, the meaning, and it is, I'm glad that the person who was playing as an actor is as a native, but still, as I said, is not describing to the people to do the things. And thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. That's why we have an open forum like this. What I would respond to is to the question you posed is that the vehicle that the film uses to get inside and to get as much knowledge as possible is the journals of the Europeans. I mean, European descended people. The second one is an American. By the way, just to a sidelight for that, obviously, the geopolitics of World War II and the need of the war machine, pertain to him. So, which is a bit different from the pure greed of the initial barons. But coming back is that we have to enter through that because that's the only initial portal about these cultures that have now, as they say, as it says at the end of the film, many of which we don't know anything more about them than what these people gave us. The film, I think, actually attempts as much as possible to give the protagonist, as I said earlier, agency. He is able to act in the world. He does have knowledge, and I don't think the film is not on the side of, oh, they have cute cosmographies and we have philosophy. Rather, it is fully on the side of the other thing, that they have systems of thought and knowledge, very much the equivalent of European philosophies, and that the tragedy here is the arrogance that would assert they do not have this, instead of learning from alternative philosophies or ways of knowing the world, that you simply want to, they're there for extraction value. The products, whether it be rubber or a magical plant or whatever, it's there to be extracted, not for exchange and to learn from other philosophies themselves. Okay? Professor Hernandez, another professor. By the way, I'm a professor of literature and film, not of anthropology, though I deal with narratives that talk about these issues.
Talking about narratives, I would like to point out that indeed the Native Americans have a philosophy, but a philosophy like my favorite period in philosophy, which is the pre-Socratics, where rather than the structure of an argument, the ideas are conveyed through metaphor. Mm. Heraclitus, all the rivers, all the fires, the fire. Not an attempt to define, but an attempt to envision. And I think that in the movie, it's not just the argument. I think the shots themselves, the photography is full of poetry. Mm-hmm. That the way the plot is paralleled by, for instance, the views of water, all those currents with each other, fighting with each other. Mm-hmm. And then at other times, just a walk searching, and then there is the jungle and you don't see anything, then the mountains from beneath, and especially everything towards the end. So I think that this is an attempt to do a narration from a different point of view, poetic narration rather than from prose. And I find that very rich. As you said before, Jerry, there aren't many, as a professor of Latin American studies, there aren't many films where we can show the point of view of the natives. Visión de los vencidos, as León Portilla said, there aren't many. There are some books, but not many films. I usually show even the rain, también la lluvia, which in a way shows the point of view of the indigenous people, but I think this is priceless from the point of view of a professor of Latin American studies. So thank you for letting us view this and bringing it for discussion.
And I hope it makes it into your syllabus.
I intend to.
Okay. Okay.
I find that it's a combination of beauty in terms of the landscape, but there are several scenes that are kind of disturbing.
Very disturbing indeed.
And one I didn't understand at all, maybe you could clarify it for me, is when, towards the beginning of the film, or more towards maybe the middle, when they are coming to this man that doesn't have an arm. Right. And he's saying something like, and he killed him at the end because something asked him to be killed, and then he says that they would torture him or something to death. So I couldn't understand what that meant.
So this is part of what I said earlier. We see the effects, but sometimes we're not shown certain of the other things. So in essence, when the world needed rubber, and the primary source of rubber before the invention of synthetic rubber, people had to go all over the world and find it in rubber plants. And so this was a huge, it's like, what do you say, oil or IT today. This is where you make money in controlling this, because it's a product that was needed by the industrial world, rubber, which led to, in essence, the invasion of any number of places in the world that had the plants themselves that were not under, they're either not under strict rule of law or under corrupt rule of law. And so, and since many of these zones were populated around the world, not exclusively in Latin America, we're talking Asia and Africa as well, by indigenous peoples, the native peoples, that they were de facto enslaved. Okay, whether they were called slaves or not, and the treatment was of utter brutality. So what we bump into here is a guy who has been at some point enslaved by the robber barons. He's been tortured, or something has happened. He's had an injury and it's cut off, and he is now allowed to live by harvesting rubber for them. So the reason he's so upset is when, the young man who had been on one of these rubber plantations, the young man who's the guide, not the shaman priest figure, but the other one, there's even a remark earlier of how did you got those lashes on your back on the rubber plantation, because if you did not behave properly, just as in the slavery systems of whether it be sugar cane or cotton or whatever, you were beaten. So what he knows is when he shows up, what he knows is the only reason they let him live is because he collects rubber for them from the trees. And again, with irony, the fellow who has gone berserk because he knows how exploited the system is, doesn't understand he is destroying the livelihood. The only reason this man is allowed to live is because he collects this rubber. So when he is not killed by them, that is by our, there's the confrontation. He says, kill me, they go away. And as they're going away, we hear the shot that kills him, because his overseers have shown up and the prediction has come true. He is of no longer of any value, and whether he is then begging to be killed or whether they just kill him because they're sons of bitches, let's just be honest, about it. It's irrelevant, because they've already recognized, you've seen somebody who has been so exploited that we're seeing them at the last moment of exploitation in their life. And I love the way, this is horrible to consider these things, but I love the narrative fashioning of this, the storytelling fashioning of it, that we see it through this one character, and so much horror that happens to so many people is, effectively portrayed by this little subplot that we bump into. Okay?
I have a question. The younger scientist, biologist that shows up, is
Yeah.
he a narrative device, or is he...
Oh, he's a real guy. Apparently he died in 2001.
He's Richard Evans Schultz, then?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the original that he's following, and they actually did work together, was Brunberg. So they're showing both two very
Right.
characters there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's based on the real journals.
I'm not sure if the second younger one was a narrative device to go into the story. But
No. It's both. It's the double plot based on stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about the word and the concept of chula chakwi, which seems to be a very important word?
Oh, yeah. I can't make any generalization about how many peoples have this concept, but in the anthropologist I know who has worked extensively with Amazonian people, I've never come across this word, but in discussions with him and in his writing, this whole notion of surrogate selves seems to be a commonplace of some of the cosmographies, and this is also comes up in discussions so-called witchcraft, and in which is it you who's doing something, or is it another version of yourself that appears? And again, this has to do with this whole notion of that comes up in one scene where they're discussing the photograph, and whether the photograph is, as we would understand it, a representation and nothing more than a representation of this self. I mean, it's not that. Or if you have a different, cosmological point of view, is this another self in some way? Not a representation, but a genuine self. The interesting point here, as it is in the story, is that it's the whole notion of someone of the self that is vacant of all the knowledge that constitutes this people or this culture, and it's a kind of nightmare double because it's the double that has none of this.
Knowing that if it's not rubber in this day and age, it's something else that has substituted this pursuit, this unending dominance of needing to gather resources for a particular way of life that has such a destructive intention, and what is it that we can do about it? And everybody in this room probably can do something. And what is it that we can do and must do to change our way of thinking to not, totally annihilate?
Well, that's a really good question. I can't answer, there's part of the question I can't answer at all. And the part I can't answer at all is the political action, because ultimately that's what it is. I mean, things change when people, dedicate resources to doing certain things, like putting certain people in jail, stopping practices, et cetera. So how, that becomes a political question. But I think this is relevant to this, is relevant in another way to this film, because this film is a highly achieved work of art that is also testimonial. That the creation and distribution and circulation of a film like this, or other works of art, and I'll mention two in just a second because we're at the Columbia Day here. I'll mention two other Columbian works. Brings all these issues to the forefront of people. And so the creation of this kind of art that is not some kind of simple-minded didactic argument art, but is deeply moving in its creation of the story worlds of these people is one kind of action. More work like this and more access for people to work like this. Because I don't think nobody here seem to think, oh, well, this is a really bad movie, I better get out of here. It's compelling to enter this story world, even when it's so trying. So, for example, just two other Colombian-based works that are similar kinds of things. There's a very fine novel translated into English by Laura Restrepo called The Dark Bride, which is all about how women are dragged into the economy of particularly of the oil towns. And the kinds of corrupt economies created by jungle oil towns and the sex industry, the gambling, the gambling industry, etc. The Dark Bride by Laura Restrepo, and again, it's from the point of view of a young girl who's drawn into the economy. It's very, very beautifully written, I might add. Then to take a similar kind of thing, but to go cinematic. There's a Colombian film made with Colombians. The director was from here, but it's completely sympathetic to Colombians, called, difficult to get this film, but it's a kind of around, called Dirty Hands. And it's about the West Coast, which is where a lot of this happens in Colombia. It not only happens in the Amazon in Colombia, it happens in the tropical zones of the Pacific as well, where drug trafficking is, and drug smuggling is this. And so it takes the point of view of two young brothers who are economically desperate, and they're not drug dealers, but they're pulled into the ancillary, the kind of secondary economic activities. You know, like how do you get the job of just taking drugs from one place to another. And because there's no other form of economic opportunity, it's the one thing you have to do for survival. And again, these two other works are like this work. They are, I'll say they partake of an immersive aesthetic. That is, they do not have simple judgments of their characters. They're very sympathetic to their characters, but there's no, the characters are not necessarily victims. They're not necessarily viewed as amoral. They do not necessarily have a conversion experience or anything like that. But what we do get in all of these works, including today's, is we get to enter that field of experience and come to terms with, decision making in ways of life that perhaps we do not experience directly, and I think that's enormously helpful for all of us to be able to develop our opinions about action from a sympathetic understanding of these situations of exploitation, because the Dark Bride is boom towns and oil. All these places not under the rule of law. Dirty Hands is, drug trafficking, Pacific Coast, and today is, the history of the Amazon. Absolutely, and you'd have to say that certainly in the last 30 to 35 years, again, with many changes in our societies, including the digital revolution, that many, many more indigenous peoples have been chronicling their own history and their own situation and have been given voice in that way. And certainly something like the museum settings, because certain things are simply not going to ever be in a multiplex. So what we need is the alternative platforms of exhibition, like here today, and free. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for here. I'm not sure we're going to have another screening this summer, but follow all our information flows. And thank you for being here today.